Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to Global Lawyers of Canada's, I think this is our fifth, possibly our sixth virtual mentor office hours. We're so grateful to all of you for joining us live tonight and for those of you watching on replay on our YouTube channel. Tonight's focus is predominantly on in-house law, but I know that our mentors have a wealth of information on all sorts of topics, so I'm sure you can ask them on absolutely almost anything. So I'm going to introduce everybody for you. I am your host, Siobhan Lennox. I am the co-president of the BC chapter of Global Lawyers of Canada. I'm an internationally trained lawyer myself, and I'm based in Vancouver, British Columbia. Today we have Amee Sandhu. She's joining us from just outside of Toronto, Ontario. And Amee is the founder and principal lawyer of Lex Integra Professional Corporation. You'll see the banner beautifully behind her head, well positioned. Amee, in her own words, I stole this from her LinkedIn page. So if you look at her LinkedIn page, you'll see this. Amee helps clients to reduce their risk by assisting them with bidding on projects, negotiating and drafting contracts, virtual general counsel and in-house advice and support, and building and assessing ethics and compliance programs. Amee builds on her experience as an in-house counsel, integrity officer, project lawyer, and commercial operations manager with almost 20 years of wide-ranging experience in assisting clients and business partners to pursue and complete major domestic and international proposals, transactions, and projects. While in-house, Amee was recognized at all levels from senior executive through to frontline staff for high-quality legal advice, business leadership, ethics and compliance guidance, contract drafting, negotiation, and project management skills. She frequently speaks on ethics and compliance and anti-corruption at conferences, panels, and at universities, and occasionally on diversity topics as well. Amee is also a teacher of business law courses, currently at Algoma University and recently at Ryerson.
Now it's Ryerson.
Now it's Ryerson? God, you need to update your LinkedIn profile.
I know, I need to update my LinkedIn.
I was looking at it and I was like, I'm sure it's at Ryerson because I'm sure we talked about the LPP program there. So I was like, oh, I'm sure it's that one. Okay, Kene joins us from Calgary, Alberta. Kene graduated from Nigerian law school before completing his LLM at the University of Strathclyde. He originally worked as a supply chain manager before completing his MCA requirements in Calgary. He did composite articles at DLA Piper Canada and Imperial Oil before moving to national firm Blake's. He is currently in-house counsel for Parkland Corporation. Kene is a highly regarded member of the legal community and gives back to our profession through his involvement with a number of organizations, including a non-bencher member of the Bencher Election Task Force. And he's also treasurer and director of Global Lawyers of Canada in Calgary. He's also an active member of the Civil Claims Duty Council with Pro Bono Alberta. So thank you very much, guys, for joining us. Really appreciate this. I'm going to jump straight into a question for both of you. But what made you want to work in-house as a lawyer rather than private practice?
Can I go first?
Why don't you go
Sure.
ladies first on this?
So I've been a lawyer for over 20 years, and I went in-house right after I was finished my second year of being a lawyer. So I worked inside of corporations for the next 17 years. And most of those 17 years, or half of those 17 years, I worked as in-house counsel, and the other half I did commercial management for 5 years, and then I did ethics and compliance for about 5 years. Or something like that. I haven't worked the math out exactly. And the reason I went in-house was when I was working in private practice as a junior lawyer, even though my co-workers at the firm were great and the older lawyers were really great at teaching me, I just sort of felt like I never really got to know my clients. I really never got to know my client's business. So I became very good at the work I was doing, but I didn't really feel connected to the work. And so what I used to do for years and years is I would cut out job advertisements from the Economist magazine that appealed to me. And so when I knew it was time for me to take a different step, I basically looked at all these things I'd been cutting out for years to see if there was like a theme. And that helped me realize this great opportunity that was in front of me. And I had applied for a job at Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, which at that time was a Crown corporation that sold and serviced nuclear power reactors around the world. And so I realized that it was a great fit because it was an in-house counsel job, but it was also the intersection point of law and policy and technology. And I just loved it. Of course there was challenges. Like once I got there, it wasn't always a bed of roses, but I just really enjoyed being inside of a corporation or inside of an organization where you really intimately get to know the organization, what their goals are, what their struggles are, and you really see how your work relates to what that company is trying to do. And so I found that really meaningful, right? If they were trying to land a big deal in country X, I knew that if I got that NDA out first thing in the morning related to that project or that proposal, I could see how my small involvement was contributing to this bigger goal, and that everybody was part of that goal. But I had also sort of, as a beginnings of trying to have a career where I believed in the end product as well, right? So when I was at Atomic Energy of Canada, we made power. We made power possible for people who didn't have power in some cases. And even today in Ontario, 50% of every school, 50% of every hospital, their power comes from nuclear. And so it was always something I could connect to. I could connect what I was doing to what they were doing. And that connection really helped me feel like I was making a meaningful contribution. So that was my start. That was my start.
Fantastic. And Kene, how about you?
Well, mine is two-pronged. I practiced corporate commercial in Nigeria before moving out to Canada. So I won't bore you guys with the details of the Nigerian bit. I'll just stick to the Canadian bit. So moved over to Canada, and I didn't start the NCA qualification immediately. I went into supply chain because I was doing that kind of law back in Nigeria, being corporate commercial contracts and compliance. And I did that for a few years before in Fort McMurray, like I was telling Linda, before moving to Calgary. I had a young family. I had to feed my family. I didn't have time to go qualifying as a lawyer. And then I guess I would say luckily, I got laid off from my job. And then I went in I passed my exams anyway, and then I went in to do my articles. So when I started in the firm at Blake's, I could see the difference. I had worked in Suncor, in CNRL, for those of you that know it out here. And I worked with lawyers. So during supply chain, you had to work with lawyers to confirm your contracts and all that good stuff. So I debated with these lawyers sometimes about negotiating clauses and stuff. And I never wanted to tell people who I was. I didn't want to tell them the devil I was. And sometimes they say, wow, you sound like a lawyer. Okay, I wouldn't say it, you know. So when I got into the firm, I missed the transactional nature of in-house. Like Amy was saying, you wake up, you see the result of the work you do. Working in a big firm, you're only 10% of a project. Your name comes out on it, but you put in a few hours, and you don't really see the project from cradle to grave. You only put in your little bit, because I was in the energy practice, so we only did that. I never saw what banking did, I never saw what tax did. But in-house, I'm the Don Chichi. Everybody comes to me regardless of what it is. And you probably ask this question later, but you have to know everything. And it's exciting. Every day I go to work, I don't know what I'm going to meet. And people come to you asking you. I remember once while I was in Imperial, someone came to me with a pension question. in an oil and gas company. But Imperial being such a big company, an old company with ExxonMobil, they had pensions, and we had to discuss surviving spousal benefit or something like that. So it's like, I need to continue doing this stuff. You know, it doesn't put me just in one area of law like family or immigration and stuff like that, but I do everything and anything. So it's very exciting.
Yeah.
And that's really it. I wake up every day knowing I've solved it, or rather I go to bed every day knowing I've solved the problem for my clients, which is the company.
Interesting. It's interesting how you both have a similar take on what it was that drove you to in-house in some degree, was that you both wanted to be a part of the whole process, not just on a small part of it. And we often forget that, I think, as junior lawyers, and when we're in law school, is, you know, we're taught to be the big picture. We're, you know, constantly switching between different practice areas, you know, whether it's rotation or different courses that we're taking, and you forget that you quite often specialize quite soon, which there's nothing wrong with. That's how we become an expert in what we're doing. But yeah, you do miss out sometimes on the whole picture of what's going on and how that intersects for the company that you're working for, the individuals that you're working for, and how that fits into a bigger strategic picture. For sure. And it's funny how you both have been involved in compliance and risk. Now, do you think that's because of the nature of you being in-house, that it just comes with the job, that this, you know, that's part of what you have to do? Or was that?
Yeah, definitely. When you're working in I mean, everything is risk. Every single decision has a risk component. And so the more, sorry, I've got people in the background. I don't know, I'll let Kene jump in here, but to me, it's totally, that's the name of the game.
Yeah, at the end of the day, let me put it this way. If the company wants to comply, or there's a risk of compliance, who do they go to? They go to the lawyer, because there could be health and safety compliance, there could be regulatory compliance, anything, but there is a regulation or a law backing that up. So they always go to the lawyers first, and then the lawyers will determine, okay, the subject matter expert would be the best person to speak to this, but the law itself, which enforces that compliance, it's the lawyers that would always have to, the company would always go to first to confirm. And the same thing with the risk. A lot of times I push back on my clients to say, this is a business decision, not a legal decision. More often than not, everything finally is legal. If it's in the contract, it's all commercial, but you have to push back, because once the lawyer signs off on anything, everybody thinks it's hunky-dory, it's all going to be great. so you see yourself working in advising on risk and advising on compliance just by the virtue of the fact that you're a lawyer. Yeah.
Is that one of the things that you found, one of the biggest differences from being in private practice to being in-house, is that once you give that sign off, that's it, they just run with it?
No, I would say the biggest difference was your accountability, right? Like if you gave bad advice, or if you gave advice without having fully understood what the need was, or if you gave advice that the people couldn't understand or implement, you will know it right away, and you will have unhappy people in your office, right? Like you're, as someone said to me once, you're not a consultant, right? Like roll up your sleeves, you're here, you're part of the team. And so if you see the company's objective is X, you're not sitting in your office waiting for a client to come and say, oh, can you help us with this? You know yourself, okay, that proposal is going to go out in 6 months. I better be checking in with the proposal team to find out when they're going to need my involvement. Because I've had situations where people will be standing in my office saying, this proposal is going out tonight. Can you approve it? And it's like 200 pages long. And you're like, well, I have to read it first. And they're like, okay, I'll stand here and I'll wait.
Wonderful, thanks very much.
Yeah, so you want to avoid situations like that, and it's not enough to say, well, my client didn't give me enough time, or I didn't know this was coming. When you're inside of a corporation, it's like it's your house, right? You can't ignore a flood or a fire in your own house and say, well, someone else is going to deal with it. Obviously, everyone has different accountabilities, and the lawyer is not going to go and do the finance department's work. The finance people are not going to be doing the health and safety work, but you all have to understand how all the pieces fit together. And sorry, I'm sort of not sure if I've answered your question, but they don't implement everything you say. And one difference between being a private practice lawyer and in-house lawyer, if you're in private practice, the clients don't tend to disagree. They might not follow your advice, but they generally don't disagree as much as when you're in-house. There can be a lot of robust discussion. And so you have to, make sure that you can stand behind your advice, but you also have to make sure your advice is not theoretical, right? Like the advice has to make sense for the situation that you are in. And, you're not there to say no, you're there to say not like this, but here's a way we can achieve the goal.
Yeah. So being constantly commercially aware of what's going on, what the client objective being your company, and constantly saying, okay, that's what you want to do. That maybe you can't do it this route, but this route might work.
Sean, I would say it's not that you're saying to the client, this is what you want to do. It's more, this is what we need to do. It's much more that you're a we.
Right. Collaboration.
Yeah. I would say, I'll add as well, that know what drives your company to succeed. You are not just a lawyer, you're also a businessman. You want the company to make money. So as an in-house lawyer, you're less risk averse than when you're in private practice. Private practice, you just tell them what the law is, they can go make their decision. But like I said earlier, when there's a risk, they come to me, and I have to think about it like, what's the probability? Is this high or low risk? And I'll tell them it's low risk, you know what, you can do it. The probability of occurrence is very low. But a firm lawyer wouldn't say that because you could be sued if something actually goes wrong, So it's, and I totally agree with him, you wear two different hats. When you're in-house, you're kind of part of the team, but when you're in a firm, you just do your work and let them make their decision elsewhere.
And do you find, Kene, that you have to put in sort of almost like a buffer around you somehow to enable you to wear both of those hats, because they are right there, like everybody who's asking you for advice, they're like right there, they're possibly in the desk next to you, just down the corridor, unlike I guess in private practice, where they actually have to try and hunt you down on the phone, and you have a choice whether you answer the phone, because it's not as easy for them to just knock on the door and say, help.
Interestingly, I had the buffer when I was in the firm. Yeah, there was a lot of buffer because when a client asks me a question, I always confirm with the senior partner, am I right? You always have to clarify and make sure you're not putting the firm at risk. But when you're in-house, it's your company. You are not putting anyone at risk, but your own company. So and like I said earlier, it's more exciting when I know my colleague can just, we have an open plan office, tap me on the shoulder and ask me something off the cuff. So you are the lawyer, you need to know it. Yeah. So you can imagine there is no lazy day for me. If someone should ask me a question I don't know, give me 10 minutes and they might be standing there waiting, like Amee said, and I'll go research it quickly and get them an answer. So working with your colleagues there, it gives them a lot of comfort when they know that they can just come to you and ask those questions and get answers. And like I said, you're a business partner with them. So the question was, is there a buffer? No, there is no buffer. It's an open plan office, which I don't like, by the way, because I want to have some conversations with clients that I have confidential. I have to go into a breakout room. I can't just do it in my office. So there's no buffer, and I like that, actually.
Yeah. So you're not quite like HR. You don't have a door that you can shut on people just so you can have that, not a secret conversation, but those more sort of sensitive conversations where everyone's not standing over your shoulder listening.
Yeah, the only sensitive conversations might be relating to employment and labor, where there's determination going to happen, or if there's a merger and there's all the confidentiality stuff. But then we go into a room, we have a war room, where, but most other things, everyone hears it. It's all business that we're discussing anyway.
Yeah. And Amee, similar for you?
I would say that the more removed you are, like if it's the culture of the legal department that you are in, where you keep a buffer, you know, the door is closed, or you make it difficult for people to access you, you can't do your job effectively, because then you will find out about things too slowly, or people will treat you the way you treat them. When you need urgent information, they're going to remember that you were so hard to reach when they needed your help.
Yeah.
And so you really have to, like, I think for young lawyers or even mid-career lawyers, I think when you're in-house, it's not so much about the law. I mean, you all should know the law. It's more about, how do you deal with people? How do you interact with people? Are people likely to come and tell you about a problem when the problem is small because they enjoy talking to you and they're happy to come and tell you something? Or do they avoid you because you're difficult? And so they don't come and talk to you until the problem now has gotten to be too big. So I think, again, the culture is totally different, but also the more access you have, the more you will know what is going on with your company. And the more quickly, like there was one, so I did a lot of compliance work, anti-corruption work. And I remember there was one file where the proposal team wanted to do something. And I knew the approval process better than they did. And I said, before you spend hours and hours and days and weeks on this proposal and thinking about it and planning it, I said, do you know, to get final approval, you need to talk to these 3 people? They're like, oh yeah, we'll go talk to them in a few weeks. And I said, no, go talk to them today. Talk to them today to make sure they know you're doing this. Find out today if they're going to support you. And sure enough, they went, they talked to them, and then they found out from the senior level person, oh, we're not interested in this deal. We're not going to approve it. And so that was, you know, a way I was able to add value to the process or to this other team. And that's not the question they came to ask me. They were asking me something else. But knowing that, I just knew it was going to be a waste of their time. It's going to be a waste of efforts of a lot of people. So you want to be, as much as time allows, right? If you're the only lawyer in a very big workplace, maybe what I'm describing is not going to be possible, but you have to find which departments or which people that you want to build these relationships with, because the more of these relationships that you have, it's just easier for everybody, it's more pleasant, and the work will get done better and faster.
That makes sense. Ronal, we actually have a question from Ronal which kind of follows on from that, because we're talking about skills here. Ronal, do you want to ask your first question?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, Siobhan, you want me to ask my the last one that I...
Yes, please.
Okay, so I want to know if there are any skills which you think we should develop or work on right now to work in-house, because since we are internationally trained lawyers who have come from a legal practice, corporate commercial law, is there anything specific you think we need for Canadian, you know, landscape, or like to work in-house effectively, apart from networking, which you mentioned right now?
Kene, what do you think?
So now I was like you. Okay, so I had those issues myself, but I was lucky because, like I said earlier, I worked in supply chain, so I already understood the Canadian culture. But to answer your question directly, you need to understand contracts and the way contracts work. So if you have any contract, look at the clauses in those contracts and understand how it works in the Canadian context. Privacy is a big thing. Confidentiality is a big thing. and the fact that sometimes even limitation of liability, for instance, whether it should be unlimited for confidentiality breaches or for intellectual property breaches. Some of those nuances in Canada are important. You already said the networking, so I guess you know that. And another thing I think Amee kind of alluded to this previously, it's about relationships. You know, do not just build relationships with people you need, because you do not know when you will need another department, and if you don't have a relationship with them, they won't respond to the lawyer even though you want something urgently. It's about building relationships. So when you're networking before you get in, you network while you're in. And I think I might have said this earlier about knowing what drives your company to succeed and having displaying business acumen. You would not have business acumen if you do not spend time with the business and understand what drives them, what wakes them up in the morning, what keeps them up awake at night. So you need to understand your business and appreciate your business's concerns for you to be able to provide superior legal service as it is. Another thing is having high commercial awareness. It kind of comes with the business acumen, but you cannot be a lawyer like in Nigeria. If you wanted to be a lawyer, that means you didn't know math. Good luck. Here you have engineers being lawyers, right? So you need to have superior business acumen. Right now, in a lot of law firms, they actually teach them how to read annual reports and financial statements, because you need to understand what's going on in the company. You need to understand how to speak to your clients and how to negotiate if the time comes with somebody else. You know, so I had said earlier about wearing so many hats, and it's exciting to be a lawyer because the accountant won't be looking at the law books, but you could be looking at the annual reports, for instance. You know, it's all fun. I will leave that for now for Amee to take some more.
Thank you, Kene.
Where are you in your studies right now, or where are you on your journey?
I'm in my licensing process, so I'm waiting for my NCA exams to happen.
Okay,
So,
but you're already here in Canada.
Yes, I'm already here in Canada.
Okay, and so when you did your training overseas, did you have work experience there?
Yes, I worked in a law firm in India with the corporate law and a little bit of experience in aviation law.
Okay, so I've worked at international companies, and
Okay.
I worked with lots of legal teams around the world, and marketing teams and operations managers, and the issues that the people face, or the issues that the lawyers might face, they were basically the same from country to country to country. I mean, obviously the laws were different, right? Privacy law in India might be different from privacy law in Canada, but the concepts would be the same. And so I think that when you are searching for your employment, or when you're talking to potential people for these reasons, don't be shy. In my view, I don't have your experience, so this is my view. But you've probably dealt with all kinds of commercial issues or corporate law issues already. And just because they were in a different jurisdiction, so what? You still have the knowledge of how to deal with senior lawyers. You still have the knowledge of how to deal with clients. You still have the knowledge of how to deal with regulators, or if a corporation wants to do something and they're violating the regulations or whatever. You already have a lot of that experience with you already. And there's nothing wrong with sort of capitalizing or building on that experience. So you're not starting from scratch. You're not starting from zero. You're working, most likely, if you work in a corporation, you're going to be working in a company that is international in some way. Maybe they buy internationally, maybe they sell internationally, maybe they're part of a multinational. And so your experience that you already have is very valid. And so I wouldn't discount that. I would just try to find ways of connecting it, right? Like maybe, in terms of aviation law, what can you apply of your experience doing aviation law in India to, major airline stories you read about in the newspapers that happen in Canada or that are happening around the world? So I think that you already have a lot of experience, and it is definitely applicable here.
Okay. Thank you, Amee.
Yeah, great question, Ronelle. Always great questions from you. I love it.
Thank you.
It comes up with fantastic zingers that really get me thinking as well. I would just add to that, if there's a particular industry you want to work in, then maybe do some general research on the main issues that might affect that industry. So, if you are interested in going into, say, oil and gas, read up on the oil and gas law, and follow the news of what's happening in the oil and gas industry so that you're aware of it. In the same way that if you were working in private practice and all of your clients were mining clients, be aware of what's going on in the mining world that your clients are operating, because I think that's often helpful to build those relationships that both Kene and Amee were talking about earlier. Because if you're aware of what's happening in the industry, the drivers, the tensions, then you have something to talk about, and you have something to kind of, to build those bridges initially with people, right?
And I think, to Kene's point, I didn't read the annual reports often enough or early enough. And that's an excellent, excellent way to learn what the company's, everything that the company is doing, but also all those positive things and negative and all the problems that they're struggling with that they have to disclose. I mean, obviously only publicly listed companies tend to have annual reports. Other companies may or may not have in the same way, but I think that's an untapped resource, and not enough employees do read them. And if that's the kind of thing you've read before you go into an interview, I think that will put you in a very good and rare position.
On that point, keep watching. We are setting up a session all about how to read annual reports and how to interpret them. So that is coming. It'll probably be in the fall, just because every accountant is super busy with annual returns and annual statements right now, but we have something in the pipeline for that one. So keep an eye out for that one, because it will be, I think, super helpful, as Kene says, and read the footnotes on annual returns. Don't just read the numbers, read the long jargon at the end, because that's actually where you find out what's going on.
Read the liability section.
Yeah.
Right. That will tell you what's very relevant to you. Yeah,
absolutely. There was a really good question in here from. Sorry, I'm scrolling up because it.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, go for it. I just lost it. Where did it go? Oh, Ronelle, you had another great question, which was, Kene, do you handle, I mean, you already talked about this, where you were talking about how in the past you'd also talked about pension plans. But do you always deal with everything, or do you actually bring in outside counsel? Like, do you outside counsel at times as well?
Oh, good question. You can never know everything. What's worse than no knowledge is half knowledge. You could send somebody to jail with half knowledge. So you have to be honest with yourself about the things you know and the things you don't know. There are very specialized areas of law: tax, regulatory, environmental, for instance. There's some, even litigation. I mean, in-house lawyers don't practice litigation, so to speak. So there are certain things you can advise on the surface, but when you need to go into the nitty-gritty, or you need to discuss with external government agencies, go lawyer up, because it's better to get lawyered up early and fix it than to try to know all these things and then get yourself into a lot more problems. That said, with the situation we find ourselves and companies are not making money right now, a lot of things are coming in-house. So trust me, I have to read a lot more stuff. I have to advise on a lot more stuff because we don't want to spend money on external counsel, but the work still has to be done. You know, so I'm becoming to be a tax expert very soon, which I don't want to be. You know, but yeah.
I think related to that, though, I think, and this is, I feel very strongly about this. I also think it's important to tell your client or tell your employer when you don't know something. And it's much better for you to say, you know what, I don't know anything about this area, and so I'm gonna look into it, and I'll give you an answer, and then, you know, go back and tell them what you have found, and then you can discuss with your client, this is the limit of what I know on this topic. And so then we make a decision together if you're going to invest your time to learn more about it, or if you need to go outside and get someone else or an expert in that area to assist you. And it's a really important, like, I think as a young lawyer or as a new employee, it's attractive to try to make it look like you know. And or people feel ashamed, oh, I should know that and I don't. That's the faster you can get over that, the better, I think, you know. And because you don't want to mislead anybody, you don't want to keep yourself awake at night wondering if that bad advice is going to come back to haunt you. But mostly because depending on what the issue is, your client or your employer might say, you know what, that's the direction we want to go in anyway, and so your small amount of information is sufficient, and we'll take the risk that we didn't do additional research. Or you and the business person together will decide, you know what, there's too much risk here, and we need to slow this project down, or we need to slow this initiative down until we get that better advice. Whether that better advice comes from you because you're going to get some time to research it, or whether you pay for it by hiring somebody else. But nobody expects you to know everything. The only person who expects you to know everything is you. And I mean, you will learn.
Yeah.
You will learn, but there's no shame in saying, I don't know a lot about that. I'm going to look into it, and I'm going to come back to you, you know, tomorrow or later this afternoon or next week, and I'll tell you what the results are. So slightly different answer than Kene's answer. But
thank you so much.
I might be older, so I have a different perspective now.
I mean, honestly, from my position, the hardest thing is telling somebody no. Like, I hate telling somebody I don't know the answer to that. And I'm always like, oh no, I need to go and find the answer. But I think as both of you have said, you can only know so much, and it's learning when you've reached that ceiling and then telling people. So then you can then decide as a team, because you are part of a team, okay, do I go and learn it, or do I bring in somebody who's already an expert? Like, what is more cost effective in terms of this particular project that the company is working on? Because really, you know, as Kenny was talking about then, it's like cost, right? You want to keep your costs. A lot of in-house teams, you're now very cost conscious, especially if bringing in outside counsel, but there's also a cost of you learning an area of law. And depending on how key that part might be for the company, it might be more beneficial to bring in an expert and they just give you an answer rather than you spinning your wheels trying to learn what the answer is. So yeah, that's definitely a great point, like learning how to say no to people. And this kind of brings me on to a question that I had earlier, which was, how do you make that future transition to an in-house role more successful? And this could be one of those points, is learning what your capabilities are and learning how to say, you know, I've reached my knowledge base at the moment. Do you guys have any thoughts on that, of how to make that transition successful for you and for the company? And does it make a difference if you're going into an established legal team where you'll be part of a bigger in-house legal team, or if you're going in as like the sole in-house counsel?
Well, I think the biggest differentiator for success are some of the things that we've already talked about, and that is, if you're working at a company and they come to ask you for advice on something, and if you write them a memo, for example, that might be an appropriate thing to do when you're in private practice at a law firm, but there's not one in-house counsel, there's nobody in-house that is expecting that or wants that. They want you to tell them, okay, look, based on what you're telling me, this is the path I would recommend, or this is the path that I think has fewer risks, and here's what the risks are. But you always need to give them a path or a direction, right? You can't just say to them, well, here's what the law says, now you decide. You always need to give a recommendation. Always. You always need to give a recommendation. That recommendation has to be clear and understandable. And one thing I've always done, or I learned this pretty quickly. As a lawyer, you want to write a long memo or explanation. I came to this conclusion because I researched this and I learned that and I considered this and here's the risks. Put that in your email, but put it at the bottom. At the top, say, you asked me this, here's my recommendation, and the analysis of how I got there is below. So that you give the people what they're looking for quickly and easily. So communicate in a way where you're not making people work to pull the answer out of your communication. And secondly, when you're in-house, a short answer is better than a long answer, unless a long answer is required. Like I would often say to people, okay, the high-level answer or my high-level comments are this. Let me know if that covers your inquiry, or I can spend more time looking into it, or I can spend more time writing something, right? Thirdly, if you're writing something, who are you writing it for, right? If a person comes to you and says, oh, but supplier's arguing with me, they don't agree to these terms and conditions, can you help me? Figure out what they want from you. Maybe they want you to write the communication to the supplier that they can just put their name on, right? Like, don't just tell them a bunch of advice. Now they're like, now what am I supposed to do with what you told me? I don't know how to describe that or explain that. So I think it's really important to learn what your client wants. But secondly, it has to be advice that they can use immediately. That would be the big difference between being a law firm lawyer and being an in-house lawyer.
Okay, so I just wrote up a list while Amee was talking, and some of these things Amee has already said. But I have 5 items. Number 1, be willing to learn. We kind of talked about this already. If you want to, like Ronald, you have an aviation law background, and you decide to go into oil and gas, trust me, you won't know a lot, but be willing to learn. When we're in private practice, if you're in a particular group, you learn the areas of law, you develop yourself in that area of law. When you're going in-house or when you're in-house, anything and everything is fair game. So be willing to learn, because even if you farm out work to external counsel, and external counsel is talking to you, you need to distill that information and give to your internal clients. Yeah, so you need to understand it. Yeah. So you won't just take the email and send it across.
Absolutely.
So be willing to learn everything and every day. Be willing to learn. Okay. Secondly, I think I said this as well. Develop business acumen. You are now a businessman or a businesswoman. You're no longer just a lawyer. Every decision you take would either make money for the company or lose money for the company. So we kind of said it earlier, in a private firm, you don't tolerate risk. But in-house, you tolerate a lot of risk because it's probably not, the probability of happening is low. You tolerate it. Something else is, I saw this on LinkedIn some time ago, bloom wherever you are. So I said earlier, I was doing supply chain. I loved contracts. And because of that, I went into private practice soon after I worked in Blake's. So whether you are, whatever you're doing, I don't want to come up with examples, like those are the only examples. Whatever you're doing, bloom in that area, because guess what? When you now go into into in-house, that might be the area of law that you would enjoy and want to work in. So whatever you're doing, make sure you enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, by all means, go find something else you enjoy doing. But by the time you get in-house, that area of law might be something you might actually be very interested in practicing in. Next thing is be very flexible. Be very, very flexible. We said it earlier again, you might be the regulatory lawyer in your firm. And next year, in your company, next year, you're moved to employment and labor. So you need to now start learning about employment and labor and everything. Secondly, when you are in a firm, your clients get you to do work, you put on your clock, you start billing. So your clients don't want you to bill them too much. But when you're in-house, your clients are your colleagues. By 5 p.m. at night, they're sending you an email, can you do this for me? So the work never stops. They might even want it by tomorrow morning, or like Amee said, somebody wants something and they're standing by your door waiting for you to do it. They're not paying you for the hours, so they give you a lot of work to do. And complex work, very simple work. Sometimes I've been the guy crossing the T's and dotting the I's. I'm like, is this my job? Is this why I went to law school? But hey, you gotta be flexible. You have to commit those hours. And then finally, you're not the smartest person anymore. I was the first lawyer in my family. So everyone I work in, hey, the lawyer is here. No, you're no longer the smartest person. When you're working in an oil and gas company, you have people that are professors in their field, or the professors, you call them, I guess, in you're a professor, you would know this. And they're working in the same company as you. They would school you on what you're talking about. So you just have to sit down and listen. They will listen to you when it comes to the law, but for that area, whether it's engineering or whether it's construction, you sit down and listen. You're not the smartest person anymore. So you're always learning, which is exciting though, not scary. You're always learning. So those are the 5 things I'll tell you.
Great tips. Linda, you have a question. You want to ask it?
Yes. So my first question is for Amee. You mentioned that you went into in-house quite early in your career path. Can you elaborate on what experience you acquired to prepare you for working in-house?
Well, I had 2 years of private practice experience. I worked at a law firm where I did corporate commercial work. And when I was hired in-house, they hired 2 of us at the same time. Both of us were second-year lawyers, 2-year lawyers. And that company's view, and many companies have this view, is they wanted young lawyers because they would just train them. So there was a lot of opportunity, and sometimes there's a lot of opportunity for companies because they would rather bring you in. Some companies would rather bring you in when you're young, and they'll just train you themselves. Probably that's more the case if they have a legal department, but you know, companies are very cost sensitive, so they are also attracted to younger lawyers because you make less money, they'll pay you less. But I've seen many in-house counsel positions that are filled by very young lawyers. Probably right out of articling, it's going to be difficult. And maybe if you have 1 year of experience after your call, that might still be challenging. But it's very popular for companies to hire younger lawyers.
Thank
so
you.
Let me add to that, Linda. There's this unspoken rule. Even I believe the Legal Counsel Network believes this, that you should practice in a private firm for about 5 years. Others say about 3 years before you go in-house, because you need to have experience in client management. You need to be able to carry a file. Because like we had said earlier, when you're in-house, everybody is your client. You need to have that confidence to be able to provide advice or to tell your colleague you will get back to them. As a junior lawyer, it seems like you might not have that confidence to do that. But interestingly, for internationally trained lawyers, they've had experience from elsewhere. So that was my selling point when I went in-house, that this wasn't my first rodeo. Okay, so if you're looking for, and I think the position I applied for wanted a 5th-year call. So if you're looking for a 5th-year call, I could give you 10 years call right here, because I've done this before and I can do this again. Maybe the clientele will be different, the culture is different, but client relationship and customer service is the same anywhere, like we're telling you now before. So it depends on what you want to pitch. If you're internationally trained, we'll say by all means you've done this, you have the experience. If you're not, and like Amee said, your in-house department is ready to train you, by all means go for it. But there's no hard and fast rule about how many years you should be before you go in-house.
Thank you. Thank you for both of your answers. And to just ask one more question for Kene, you mentioned about your passion for contracts. So I was wondering if you could recommend some ways to study contracts if you're not already working in a law firm.
How to study contracts? I would think if you know anyone that's, it's easy. I would think it's easy enough to find a contract anywhere. And study the clauses. Every section of the contract tells a story or has, it's there for a reason. And that's what, initially I didn't believe that, like audit clause. Who cares about audit clause? But there would be a time every part of that contract would be used. And guess what, when you go to litigation, the most overlooked sections of that contract matter in front of a judge. So if you find a good contract and you review the sections, and by the time you do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 contracts, you will see a similarity going through, whether it's limitations of liability, whether it's indemnification, for instance, even things as simple as confidentiality clauses. There's a similarity that goes through contracts I've seen in Canada. And once you start with one and you make sure you understand every single clause there. If there's no clause, if there's any clause you don't understand, hook me up and I'll tell you why that clause is important in the long run. You just need to make sure you appreciate the contract and everything that goes in there. If you overlook any, that could be detrimental in the long run.
Thank you.
Yeah, Linda, if you didn't take contract law at law school, I'd highly recommend getting the Introduction to Contract Law book, because it literally breaks down, as Kene says, you can basically go to any law publisher online and there'll be an Introduction to Contract Law aimed at lawyers. Don't get the Dummies Guide 101 to contract law because it's a bit too simplistic in its terminology. But it literally breaks down all the clauses. There's also been a lot of talk recently. Yes, exactly, Amee. Ken Adams on contract drafting, that's exactly the one. There's also been a lot of write-ups recently about force majeure clauses, very specifically around what Kene was talking about. Force majeure was always seen as just a boilerplate clause that no one really spent too much time on. And yet it's being the most heavily litigated clause this year. So there's lots and lots of research, like write-ups on it. So I mean, if you go to Canley, there's a lot of write-ups on it right now that people are doing. If you have access to Practical Law, there's a lot of write-ups there. If you have access to Practical Law, it was something I heavily used in the UK. It's relatively new here in Canada, but they have a great breakdown of basically the anatomy of a contract, and it breaks it down into, why you put the recitals here, why you put the boilerplates here. It really does turn it into sort of, okay, this is why there's a structure to it, this is why there's a layout to it. But yeah, read either of those ones. Yep, the contracts course by Harvard, agreed, is free right now. Harvard Law School is making a lot of their courses free online for people right now. So if you have time, go and attend one of those. I know Mrinal is doing a lot of these online courses at the moment. So if you follow her on LinkedIn, she shares them all on her LinkedIn page. That's how I know they exist. She's very good at doing that. So yeah, I would read up.
But I would caution one thing. A contracts law textbook from law school is nothing like doing a contract when you're working in-house.
True, but it gives
so
you the fundamental basics of basics.
It's a bit chicken and egg. It's a bit chicken and egg because you need to get a contract. I mean, take your cell phone contract, right? Or take your lease where you're living, or if you have an employment contract. Every contract tells a story. And can you find the story? What is the purpose of that contract? I mean, a contract basically tell you who is doing what to whom and when. That's basically what a contract is. I'm going to pay you $25 every time you come to my house and cut my grass. I will provide you with the equipment, but if you break my equipment, you have to buy me a new lawnmower. If you slip and fall in my driveway, I will pay for your hospital bills, right? Like the contract is just telling a story. Who is doing what? Who were they doing for? What are we going to pay you for that? And then most importantly, what happens if things go wrong? That's what those are basically the elements. And so, I mean, your cell phone contract, your bank mortgage, your credit card contract, all of these things are contracts, and they build on the same principles, but some contracts might be a page long. I've done contracts that were 600 pages long, but the bones, the skeleton are basically the same.
Absolutely. All right, I have one final question, and then I'm gonna open it up to last questions for everybody. Amee, specifically, I know you talk about this a lot on social media, and you talk about legal market disruptors. I know, Kene, you touched on this a little bit too earlier. And right now, I believe we're in a disruption era. We're all working from home. We're doing this remotely rather than sitting around a table talking about it. What are some of the big disruptors, changes that you see coming, Amee?
Innovation. I see innovation of all kinds. A big one, I think, is how can we use technology, and how do we change the legal industry so that lawyers stop thinking about everything that they do as being so original and start to use templates, start to use machines to, let's say, create parts of a contract. So whether you agree with it or not, whether I agree with it or not, that is coming. The second thing, and it's related to that, is making law a commodity. So what parts of law require in-person assessment, and what parts of law could be done by non-lawyers or could be done by the client themselves. I'm seeing more and more law firms that have basically you enter the data into their database, and this might generate the first draft of a contract. So I think we're going to see more of that. Otherwise, I think I'm seeing prices and rates charged to clients all across the board. And, as you've already said, Siobhan, like, I think this whole COVID-19 time has shown us that maybe the law firms having a big office and a fancy address isn't adding that much value to the services that they're providing to their client. So I do see a change coming for those big traditional law firms. But in terms of other innovations, I'm seeing a lot of alternatives to working at a law firm. I think there's a lot of younger people who are working as lawyers and at the same time developing apps. So if any of you are interested, you can check out what the Legal Innovation Zone at Ryerson is doing, at Ryerson University in Toronto. So they've got a whole incubator just for legal technology and legal disruptive activities. And I'm also seeing a lot of contract law, like a lot of lawyers for hire where there's no permanent employment. And it's an opportunity, but there's also a risk there. And so I think that might be something for you to explore. So law firms like McCarthy Tétrault and Blake's and Osler's, and those are just 3 that I know of, are creating like small teams that might be targeting the startup market. Well, how do they have such low rates to incorporate startups and write their shareholders agreements? Well, they're relying on foreign trained lawyers, they're working on NCA candidates, first-year lawyers, to prepare these documents. So I think that's a growing area. I don't know right now if in the long term that's going to be good for the lawyers or not, but that's one new area of opportunity. For Osler's and for Blake's, as far as I'm aware, they're more targeting younger lawyers. For McCarthy Tétrault Align, who is one of my clients and I do some work for them, they're not limiting it to that. Like they actually do look for more experienced people. So they're targeting different kinds of uses for those lawyers. So I think we're seeing a lot more of that. And then finally, we're seeing a lot more innovation coming from the big law firms themselves. I think they've been relatively slow to be innovative, just despite what they might say, what their websites might say.
Yeah, I would agree. From what I do.
Yeah, they're larger. They're going to be more slow moving.
Yeah, they're moving parts to like get it through the process to like churn it out.
Yeah. The bigger you are, the slower you move.
And because at the end of the day, companies want to spend less on legal fees. Our legal department, our bonuses, part of the metrics is about if we met our target for legal spend on external counsel. And I kind of mentioned it earlier, right now, we're even reducing that legal spend even more. And I agree with Amy, where due diligence is now being farmed out to companies that get either junior lawyers or lawyers that will be able to charge out $50, $60 an hour. Instead of going to the big firms, we go to these other companies to do the due diligence, and they pay less. Companies are using that more. And the big firms like McCarthy, I'm trying to remember the name of their due diligence arm now. But,
that's MT Align now.
Yes, exactly, MT Align, yeah. So, and they see that this is happening. So you either go with it or you're left in the lurch. And actually, I would have asked Amy this question: what you think about the big 4 now going into law? You know,
Firms.
Yeah, and
I feel like you said earlier. I feel like we've seen, what's the expression? It's not my first rodeo. I think it's not their first rodeo. About 15 years ago, there was an attempt at this, or a similar attempt, obviously not the same thing, with Davis and Company and like law firms that were trying to partner with or be underneath the umbrella of the accounting firms. So I think they have a role, and honestly, like I think that there's enough work for everybody, but probably they're going to be trying to find a different niche. Like for example, I do a lot of work in the area of anti-corruption, and so I see that the law firms do a lot of the investigation side, and the defense or prosecute, like that kind of work. Whereas when I've seen the accounting firms get involved in that same area, they might be doing more things that are like aligned to risk assessment and implementing a program, like proactively implementing an ethics and compliance program. That's work that I do as well. And so when I've been talking to the big accounting firms, I see that they're more looking at it, not exclusively, but I think they'll find their own niches. Beyond that, I think it's a very interesting area, and I don't have the full information to give a response here. And so I would have to read more about it and see what experiences other jurisdictions have had with this, to see what the risk and rewards have been. Both, I mean, the main reason you would have these rules against stuff like that is protection of the public. So I would want to take a look at other jurisdictions to see if they allowed non-lawyers to have, ownership of law firms. Did they see any kind of resulting decrease in service to the public or protection to the public? That's how I would assess it.
If that's something you guys are interested in, it exists in the UK. You can have non-lawyers running law firms. They've had it for a number of years now. The big four accounting firms all have a legal arm in the UK. And I think, as Amee, as you were saying, Ernst & Young, for example, they do a lot of immigration. A lot of them focus on tax, which makes sense, being an accountant.
Yeah, makes perfect sense, yeah.
Because, you spend so much time as a tax lawyer dealing with the accountants anyway. There is some kind of synergy, and to have you all there, with access to the same paperwork can be beneficial. So there is information out there about how it's working in the UK, if that's an area you're interested in. Personally, I think it's going to grow and grow. And I think there's going to be more of that sort of interaction between them. But I agree, Amee, there is that sort of concern about protection of the public and how that's managed. And I believe that's something that's a big barrier currently here in Canada to opening it up, because there has been, I think in the US, they opened it up in some of the states in the US, and there's some pretty funky, interesting case law about things that have happened, because obviously, the US, they're notoriously litigious, so there's a lot of information about it out there on the World Wide Web that you can read about. But I know when I was starting in law in the UK, this was something they were all discussing, and it was, heavily talked about in law school in my first few years of practice. But yeah, I think it's going to come. I think especially now we're seeing more of that interplay between different disciplines and how can they provide multiple services at once. But it's where that risk stops. And then where do you put in place Chinese walls, which we're not supposed to call them Chinese walls anymore, those walls of
ethical walls.
Ethical walls, that's it. Ethical walls that we put in place because you don't want everybody to know everything about certain things. Like you can't have your auditor be the same as your regular accountant for obvious reasons. It's a similar kind of thing. You need to have those barriers in place. With any company, they quite often will install those walls, cones of silence, ethical barriers between people as they're discussing various things, like Kene was mentioning at the beginning. If they're talking about a potential acquisition or merger, you'll go and lock yourselves in your war room. And that's not permanent. It's until the deal gets to a certain point, and then you bring everybody else in because you don't want it to impact other parts of the business for something that might not potentially carry on and things like that. That's great. I'm really interested in this area of disrupting industries. So I love seeing Amee's posts when she talks about it, and she talks about all the kind of, the risks, but also the potential gains that are coming out. And she does like to talk about these things. So it's great. Does anyone have any questions before we let these guys go? Because I know it's getting very late out east. If you do.
I just have a quick question. It's a little personal in nature, but is there any part of practice in a law firm that you guys miss or think is lacking in-house?
I wouldn't say it's lacking. I would say they're two entirely different animals. And I now have my own law firm. So it's a very, and as I'm listening to Kene speak, I miss it. I'm like, oh, maybe I should go back in-house. They're very, very different. And I think that when you're in-house, you really are potentially doing everything. And that, and when you're in-house, it's very exciting and dynamic, but you're becoming an expert in handling everything, and you're becoming an expert in how to handle those things, but you're not necessarily becoming a subject matter expert the way you would if you specialized and you only worked in one topic area. And so sometimes that I do miss that, okay, if I only did, you know, securities regulation, or if I only did environmental litigation, then you would develop this real expertise in a knowledge area. Whereas when you're in-house, I think a lot of your expertise is more about people management, how to work in teams, how to manage multiple very different things happening at the same time. And so you can't really compare the two. Yeah, but if I had to pick one thing, I would say working in a firm or anywhere where you can specialize. I mean, it's like an extension of your studies, and so that I miss.
Well, for me, it's having to. I don't work on the big deals anymore. When you are in a firm, you work on hundreds of millions of dollars worth of transaction. But when you're in-house, you could be debating with somebody on a $1,000 contract. Like, my life is just wasted on this, you know. So I miss the big ticket items. You know, then you go to bed saying, wow, I was actually part of that $100 million deal.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your answers.
You're welcome.
And thank you for letting us know that so much of the, you know, the Harvard material and other materials are available right now. I will add it to my list of things to do that I probably will not get to.
Oh, I'll send you a list of everything.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
I'm trying to encourage Mrinal to write more for us for our blog when she has written me one, haven't you? Though I think.
No, I'm yet to submit it.
But yeah, there's a few people who've been doing the LexisNexis legal research sort of certificate, so that they get kind of familiar with how to use LexisNexis and, you know, LexisNexis Canadian way of researching. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but every jurisdiction I've worked in, everyone tells me there's a different way to do research.
It is quite different.
Yeah, I figure as long as you get the answer in the end, and the answer is presented in the way the client, or internal or external client wants, you're winning. But the course is, I think, free. So yeah, if anyone wants to do some legal research, it's a good one to go and do. Everyone's come back with, you know, rave reviews about it on that one. From me, thank you so much. Kene, Amee, thank you so much for giving up your time tonight. It was lovely to talk to you both. I've learned lots tonight, as always. I always feel like I come away from these sessions, and I know, Amee, you mentioned this earlier, that you come away from these sessions having learned so much from the mentees and also from the other mentors on the panel. So thanks so much, guys, for sharing your insight into in-house law. It's something that I think more and more people are looking at, they're interested in, and I think your insights have been very helpful in forming some plan of action for some people, affirming a few thoughts on it. I will post this onto our YouTube channel, probably be tomorrow. I'm going to be honest, I'm going to go and eat some food first. And I will also put links to Kene and Amee so that you can find them, so that you can see what they're up to on social media. And we will be back next week with some other wonderful guests who I should check who I have for the following week when I see.
It's Daniel next week. Daniel Lowe.
There we go. See, Kenny always knows. He's our treasurer because he keeps track of these things for me. And yeah, and if you guys have any questions, please do reach out. If there's any topics you want us to cover, let us know. We will try and find somebody who is an expert in that area so they can share their knowledge with you. And guys, thanks very much again. Have a lovely rest of your evening. Have a great rest of your week.
To take your screenshot?
I will do it right now.
Could we get Yannick and Agnes and Nishita and is it Olufonke and to that? Can we get everyone to take themselves off of put their videos back on? For
like 2 seconds. It's okay if your hair's a mess. It's okay if you've got children crawling over you. We don't care.
I have to tell you, I had a Zoom call last Friday, and there was people from the U.S. and Brazil, and one of my kids came in with a snail because Friday she decided she loves snails, and she put it on my shoulder during the Zoom call, and she wouldn't take it off for a few minutes. And I was like, this is like COVID-19, week 9, week 10. I'm like, whatever. It's me and the snail together on the Zoom call.
Wow.
Multitasking at its finest. And I think this is one of the things that's really going to show everyone that how resilient we all are, is that, you know, we can do these Zoom calls, we can be professional, and at the same time we can have children, animals, and spouses and housemates around us at the same time, and yet we can still deliver on time.
Yep. I think everyone's working more now. The people who are not working have their own challenges, obviously. And then the people who are working, I think, are doing more right now because there seems to be no barrier between work and home right now.
Yeah, I'm fortunate I have a door between where I'm currently working and the rest of my condo. But my husband is working from our kitchen counter. So he literally sees his computer all day, every day, 7 days a week. And it's so tempting to just, oh, I'll just finish this off now. Really, it's like midnight, honey. Put it down.
Yeah, I hope the rest of you are all safe wherever it is that you are.
Absolutely. All right, guys, one last picture. Everybody smile. Perfect.
All right.
All right, guys. Take care.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you. Okay. Bye-bye.